Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the book summary series. And in today's book, I'm going to be discussing a book suggested by one of you. So, thank you so much for giving your valuable inputs and making me want to read more books as well. So, today, I'm going to be discussing one such book, and that is Thinking Fast and Slow by a Nobel Prize winning economist, Daniel Kahneman. So now this book, in one word, if I have to describe it, would be mind blowing. Okay. And when I feel that a book is mind blowing, I think I'll do more justice summarizing this book if I give you key takeaways, my opinion, and something to tell you chapter wise that is inside the book so that you get interested in reading it. However, having said that, there's another important point that I want to say before I go into the summary is that it's not a very easy book to read because because he's a Nobel Prize winning person, and he has so much knowledge to share in the book that he has mentioned a lot of experiments that were conducted by him, his peers, his collaborations with other scientists and doctors in different fields. And so there are a lot of experiments, lot of conclusions from those experiments, and that kind of gives it a little bit of maybe, if I put it simply, scientific angle to the book. So those of you who are not so much into reading, and want to learn, the summary should suffice for you. But those of you have a knack for reading or researching or get interested by such things, then you must read the book, because then you will get satisfied as a scientific reader. They are giving you the context, the premise, the experiment, the results, and then if you anticipate what he's going to say in the result, then you have another nice moment with yourself. Oh, I guess that, kind of like this. So they also have experiments for the reader, simple ones and small ones, to have various bulb on moments for the reader. However, I personally felt that for someone from a non-science background, it can be a little daunting to read those experiments again and again and again. So let's get on with the summary before any further delay. Uh, it is divided into parts. The book is divided into parts, and basically throughout the book, you will be referred or read about two systems of the mind. So before I go into chapter wise detail, let me tell you what this is about. I think it will be more clear. So the two systems of the mind actually drive our thoughts and decision making process. Okay, so according to the author, there is system 1, which is our fast, intuitive, automatic mode of thinking, which operates like quickly, effortlessly, and is responsible for our instincts and immediate reactions. And then there is the system 2, which is the slower, more deliberate, analytical mode of thinking, which requires effort and attention to process information and make complex decisions for us. So, So initially, when you start reading the book, they give you the introduction of what system one decisions are like and what system two decisions are like, and where they expected people system two to react. However, people reacted using the system one only. So it can be a little overwhelming in the beginning. However, it's very interesting for someone who wants to know their own brains functioning well. It's a very interesting concept. And then they also say that if you train your mind consciously, you make your both systems strong enough to actually rely on your own intuition. A lot of times people take intuitive decisions and then end up saying, "Arey, it didn't work out." Why does that happen? They've kind of tried to scientifically explain that as well. So some key takeaways through from the whole book would be how we are influenced by our cognitive biases that lead us to make irrational or flawed decisions. How our emotions and intuitions can actually influence our decisions more than we realize consciously, and our cognitive resources are actually limited, we often rely on heuristics, mental shortcuts to make decisions. So they also talk about how brain sometimes wants to be lazy. So the system 2 actually can be lazy at times if you don't activate it well enough. Then we are overconfident most of the times in our abilities and tend to underestimate the role of chance in our lives. To another takeaway would be like, to make better decisions we need to be aware of what kind of biases slow us down or our thinking processes, and actively engage our system to in thinking, like I mentioned, training your system too. And another one can be specifically said like learning to think critically and being open to new information and different perspectives. You can actually improve your decision making skills and lead better lives, because then your brain is not trained or isn't referring to an old database. If I have to simplify in terms that you can understand, if you read more, they say, you know more, and your brain stores more information somewhere or the other. And they have explained how whatever information that you've consumed uh, until today, let's suppose, is actually acting out in the decisions you make. So in a lot of small ways, there is a lot of reference that the brain does to the information that it has been opened up to. Now let's, if you have to talk about chapter wise or part wise the book, let me explain. So it's into different parts and two systems. The two systems I already told you about. So chapter 1 in part 1 would be like they are creating the characters of the story. So introduction of the system 1 and system 2 and how they are working in our minds, they tell you that. Then in chapter 2, it's about attention and effort. They explain how the slower and more deliberate system, the system 2, actually requires attention and effort to function. And sometimes, like I said, it's lazy. So in chapter 3, they told about how the minds are wired to actually conserve your own energy. So if the mind feels that, this is an easier problem, I can sort it with system 1, the system 2 won't even get activated, and how that can actually hamper you sometimes. So that's what they've talked about in chapter 3. And in chapter 4, they come and talk about the what they say is the associative machine, explaining how system 1 relies on associations and patterns to make decisions, something which is affected by the information that you have consumed. So the narrower your database, the more associative it gets quickly with different things which actually are not related. So the more exposure you give your own brain, the more actively it can seek out and work. Then the part 2 is about heuristics and biases. This one has a lot of experiments in all the chapters, some nice ones as well for yourself. And then they talk about the law of small numbers, in which they explain how we tend to make conclusions based on very small sample sizes. And if you might have heard of this concept before, that what you feel that everybody around you knows that. The brain assumes this and works according to that. And this is one of the very big flaws of uh, uh, when it comes to team communications. If I have to talk in your professional surroundings, if you know something, you are assuming that everyone in your team knows that, and you work from that perspective. However, that might not be true, and it leads to conflict or mismanagement or miscommunication. So if you understand this point, even through his example or experiments, it can actually help you a lot better while working with different kinds of people in different kinds of teams. Then in chapter 6, he talks about anchors. So he explains how initial estimates affects decision making in general people, and how visible anchors of numbers or other aids can actually influence people. So I don't know if you've ever had a chance to see any mentalist show or videos. They actually use anchors a lot in their surroundings. They might have, in the background of the screen of the stage, they might have a very big banyan tree put, and then they will ask the audience to give them papers and say, just draw a picture, and then randomly pick someone from the audience and say, okay, show your picture, but before to everybody but not me. And when the person shows to everybody and the mentalist without seeing the picture says it's a picture of a tree, everyone goes into the shock. Now, why has he gone into a shock? Every audience thinks he's a magician, but he's not. He's actually subconsciously fed you with this anchor of a tree. Ever since you entered the auditorium for a show, you have been watching trees. So the first thing when they ask you to draw is will come to your mind would be a tree, and you would end up making a tree. So that's the logic, simpler logic behind anchors. Then in chapter 7 he talks about science of availability. He explains how we tend to make decisions based on the information that is most readily available to us. So mm, it is up to you what information is most readily available to you, and again it is in your hands how you can benefit from it. Then chapter 8 is about availability, emotion, and risk. Oh, this one is very interesting because he talks about a lot of gambling experiments with that can be done with people and how they tend to react. Even though benefit of the gamble is in another deal, people tend to choose the one that is not more beneficial because of certain emotions and again availability of things. So how emotions can cloud your judgment, and especially when it is up to taking risks. He explains that. Then in chapter 9 he comes to something called as the Tom W speciality. So he explains how experts in a particular field are not always better at making decisions in that field than non-experts. Very interesting. This chapter was very interesting for me. I learned a lot of new things here as well. But to simplify, it's about this. Then in the next chapter, chapter 10, the law of large numbers. He explains how large sample sizes can help us make more accurate predictions that are actually true instead of having what our brain functions with small sample sizes. If you actually consider proper big sample size, it works. Then in chapter 11 he talks about Bernoulli's errors. So until this this chapter, for me Bernoulli was always a scientist who had given a lot of theorems in physics, but then he gets here and somehow he has been able to put Bernoulli in this book as well. And he says that explains how we tend to make errors when we are estimating probabilities. So it's not about physics, but yeah, it's related. So I'm guessing Bernoulli had a lot of works, and that's how he ended up in this book as well, which is about mind and brain and functioning. So this again is a very if you are into numbers, you will like this chapter a lot. Then he comes with something called prospect theory in the next chapter, and he introduces this theory which explains how people make decisions based on potential gain or potential losses. Okay, then you come to the third part of the book, which is the last part of the book, and he talks about overconfidence in the chapter called the confidence of conjunction. He explains how we overestimate the probability of events that require actually multiple conditions to be true. However, we actually don't consider all the conditions most of the times in a general being state of being, and that kind of impacts us. So we tend to blame a lot of other things because of that. So it's been a long, I think this is the first summary that has crossed 10 minutes, but I tried a lot to, justify summarizing this book in under 10 minutes, but somehow that was not being possible. So I'll leave you with this, that this book highlights the importance of understanding how your mind is working in all its aspects of intuition, rational thinking, decision making. And it gives you a lot of practical insights derived from a lot of experiments. And it helps you understand tools that can improve your thinking patterns and processes, and you can actually end up making better decisions. So if you are into that, you must go and read this book. However, if you're not, I think I have given you more than enough information for you to just know about this book. However, I couldn't talk about all of the experiments because then the summary would have gone to about an hour plus for sure. But thank you for listening in, and thank you for suggesting this book because I learned a lot. And until next time, goodbye and take care.